nerds, what's up? Today, it's my least favorite books of 2020. See you after the jump. So I actually only have 4 books this year that I consider bottom of the pile. I just read so many books this year that none of them really made this distinction. I didn't even get 5 of them, so that was kind of exciting. But let's get into it in no particular order. The Future of Another Timeline by Annalee Newitz. So I already made a kind of rant video about this book. You can go check that out if you want particulars. This book just failed for me in its purpose. The idea was to make a very large political statement about women through history with time travel. And the concept of this book was incredible. I immediately bought it when I read the flap. It sounded so interesting, and it just really didn't deliver. The points that the author tried to make were just so clumsy. There was no nuance, and the characters felt very underdeveloped and stilted. I appreciated so much that the author was trying to bring a lot of representation into this book. The problem is that her characters weren't real people. They were a list of traits. And when you're trying to make a book that represents people, that's not very successful. Overall, I was just very bummed out that this book contained very little actual commentary and kind of fell back on easy tropes, and I just wasn't that impressed. That being said, I'm actually going to keep an eye out for this author. She seems like a super awesome person. I'm very interested in her background, and I'm hoping that she'll be able to refine her craft in a few novels and that I could try her again, and hopefully it'll be a little bit more successful than this book. Next is The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapowsky. Look, my opinion on this is very unpopular, but I did not like this novel and I thought it was extremely sexist. I was excited to read a Witcher novel because of the popularity of The Witcher 3 as a video game, and I was expecting something different than I got. The fact that I think this is sexist is very controversial. People did not agree with that. I did not get any arguments that really made me change my mind about it. I still view it as a pretty sexist book. But beyond that, I actually had other issues with it. I didn't really like the short story format, which is more my fault than the author's fault because that's just not what I was expecting. Additionally, I just thought a lot of the character work was confusing. There was really only one character I felt connected to, and it wasn't even the main character. There was this kind of weird dichotomy where at the very beginning of the book, we see the Witcher being very brutal to a group of men and killing them. But then the rest of the book, he's talking about how he just won't kill people, which was really bizarre. And it wasn't like a time jump because I checked. So I just didn't really get it. It didn't make a ton of sense to me, even though I loved the world building and I loved the ideas presented in the novel. It did nothing for me. I am giving The Witcher a second chance with a novel that people told me they thought I would like better. And supposedly The Last Wish isn't close to the best representation of The Witcher, so I am going to give it a second chance, but as this current one book stands, it was probably my least favorite book of the year. Okay, guys, I really, really need you to not judge me for reading this next book. Look, back in the day, I was a huge America's Next Top Model fan, and I am praying one of you who is watching this video knows what show I'm talking about and has seen it. But there was a guy on the show who was the art director named Manuel, who I really liked, and he put out a book this year that was advertised as a fictional account, but really was kind of coded to be like a tell-all of behind the show, but fictional. And so I bought it, okay? And I read it. It's called The Wig, the Witch, and the Meltdown. Guys, this book was literally terrible. I know you're looking at this and been like, Bookborn, you should have known this book was going to be terrible, but I had hope, and it was such garbage. It made me lose a ton of respect for Manuel, which is kind of a bummer because I always really liked him in the show. I know probably a lot of you haven't seen that show, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. The most confusing thing about this book is that it had pretty much a one-to-one mapping for real people that were on the show, even though this was touted as fictional, and then it made wild claims about them that ended up being not true. Because I checked, I researched. So it just felt like a very irresponsible book. Like, either do a tell-all if you're going to have characters that similar, or make it very fiction with elements of truth. And it didn't make any sense as a novel. Additionally, there were 2 self-inserts, which was baffling. Still not sure what that was about. And third, my favorite quote from this book was when he said, "She was faker than a $2 bill." In the United States, $2 bills are real. And I'm pretty sure he's American. So that's just the smallest example of the type of writing you saw in this book. Anyway, please tell me if you've seen America's Next Top Model. Please comment below so I can talk to you about the enigma that is this book. I'm still so confused. Maybe you know what? It was rude of me to say that The Witcher was the worst book I read this year. It was not. It was this book. This book was way, way worse. So I apologize to The Witcher for saying that. And finally, the last book on the list this year is The Language of Flowers by Vanessa Diffenbaugh. Now this book is interesting. This was the book I rated the most high out of all of my least favorite books. And it's mostly because I actually very much understand why people would like this book. I read this as a part of a book club I was in before everything shut down. This was one of the last books we read, and everyone in the book club loved it except me. Typical. So I understand the reasoning behind people loving this book. It was well written. It deals with very difficult issues that I think need to be written about more. I just personally didn't like it for a couple of reasons. One, the romance in the novel didn't make any sense to me, which is always a huge pet peeve when I'm like, this happened too fast. This doesn't make sense. That wouldn't happen that way. It's just really hard for me to deal with that. And another thing it had, which is a personal problem, I admit, but it had accounts of child abuse that were extremely triggering for me, extremely upsetting. I could barely read it. I was trying to get through it and I couldn't. And it just really took down the enjoyment of the book for me. And it wasn't just those accounts, because the author's defense, it was an account that probably would have happened in the book, but I just felt like the way it was handled was difficult for me. There were some unrealistic parts around it that made me upset. Overall, I just really didn't enjoy it. But again, I feel like it's not because it was a bad book. It was just because personally for me, it was just not my cup of tea at all. So I did have to add it to this list because I just really did not enjoy that book. So those were my least favorite books this year, and I had a great year of reading, and so I'm super excited for next year, and I hope it's just as good, and I barely have any books I don't like. Let me know in the comments below which is your least favorite book you've read this year and why, and especially I want to know if it's like a popular book that you really didn't like, kind of like what happened to me and The Witcher. So drop in my comments and tell me. And as always, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.